So this is Flat Stanley, and we're starting at chapter 4, so this is part 2 of the book, and I think we'll probably get right through to the end. Mr. and Mrs. O.J. Dart lived in the flat just above the lamb chops. Mr. Dart was a very important man, the director of a famous art museum in the city. Stanley Lambchop had noticed in the lift that Mr. Dart, who was ordinarily quite a cheerful man, had become quite gloomy and sad, but he didn't know why. And then at breakfast one morning he heard his parents talking. "Oh, I see," said Mr. Lambchop, reading the newspaper over his coffee cup, "that still another painting has been stolen from the famous museum, and it says here that Mr. Dart, the director, is at his wit's end, so he's just pulling his hair out. He's absolutely fed up. He's got no idea what's going on. And there's the newspaper, and it says, museum art stolen. So poor Mr. Dart, who lives near them in their block of flats, is just really sad because at work he keeps getting all these things stolen." "Dear, are the police no help?" said Mrs. Lambchop. "Seems not," said Mr. Lambchop. "Listen to what the chief of police told the newspaper. We suspect a gang of sneak thieves. These are the worst kind. They work by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch. However, my policeman and I will keep trying. Meanwhile, I hope people will buy tickets for the policeman's party and not park their cars where the signs say they don't." The next morning, Stanley Lambchop heard Mr. Dart talking to his wife in the lift. "These sneak thieves work at night," Mr. Dart said. "It's very hard for our security guards to stay awake when they have been on duty all day. And the famous museum is so big that we cannot guard every picture at the same time. It's hopeless, absolutely hopeless. They're going to steal more pictures." Suddenly, as if an electric light bulb had gone on in the air above his head, ding, so it's got an idea. It's like a really nice idea. Stanley Lambchop told the idea to Mr. Dart. "Stanley," Mr. Dart said, "if your mother will give you permission, I will put you and your plan to work this very night." Mrs. Lambchop gave her permission, "But you will have to take a long sleep this afternoon, so I wonder what Stanley's going to do." That evening, after a long nap, Stanley went with Mr. Dart to the famous museum. Mr. Dart took him into the main hall, where the biggest and most important paintings were hung. He pointed to a huge painting that showed a bearded man wearing a floppy velvet hat. So this is the famous painting here. And there's Stanley looking at the painting. Mr. Dart explained it was the most expensive painting in the world. There was an empty picture frame on the opposite wall. We shall hear more about that later. Mr. Dart took Stanley into his office and said, "It's time for you to put on a disguise." "I'd already thought of that," said Stanley, "and I brought one. Here's my cowboy suit. It has a red bandana and I can tie it over my face and no one will recognise me in a million years." "No," said Mr. Dart, "you will have to wear the disguise that I have chosen." From a cupboard he took a white dress with a blue ribbon and a pair of shiny pointed shoes and a white straw hat and a blue band that matched the sash on the dress and a wig and a stick. The wig was made of blonde hair and it had little curls in it, and the stick was curved at the top and it also had a blue ribbon. Stanley was disgusted. So he wants him to look like that. And of course Stanley doesn't want to do it because actually he's a boy and he doesn't want to wear a dress. "I shall look like a girl, that's what I shall look like," he said. "I wish I'd never had my idea." But he was a good sport, so he put on the disguise. "In this shepherdess disguise," Mr. Dart said, "you will look like a painting that belongs in the main hall. We do not have cowboy pictures in the main hall." Back in the main hall, Mr. Dart helped Stanley climb up to the empty picture frame. Stanley was able to stay in place because Mr. Dart had cleverly put 4 small spikes in the wall, one for each hand and foot, so he can hold on to them, little like pokey things out of the wall. The frame was a perfect fit against the wall, and Stanley looked just like a picture. "Except for one thing," said Mr. Dart. "Shepherdesses are supposed to look happy. They smile at their sheep in the sky. You look very fierce and not happy, Stanley." Stanley tried hard to get a good look on his face and even to smile a little bit. Mr. Dart stood back and looked at him. "Well," he said, "it may not be art, but I know what I like." He went off to make certain that all the other parts of Stanley's plan were being taken care of, and Stanley was left on his own. It was very dark in the main hall, because it's night time, remember, because he'd had a little sleep in the day. A little bit of moonlight came through the windows, and Stanley could just make out the world's most expensive painting on the opposite wall. He felt as though the bearded man in the painting were just waiting for something to happen. Time passed and he got tireder and tireder and boreder and boreder. Anyone would be tired this late at night, especially if they had to stand in a picture frame balancing on little spikes. Maybe they won't come, Stanley thought. Maybe the sneak thieves won't come at all. The moon went behind a cloud, and then the main hall was pitch black. It seemed quiet too, and there was so much darkness. There was absolutely no sound at all. Stanley felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle beneath the golden curly wig. Creak! The creaking sound came from right in the middle of the main hall. Even as he heard it, Stanley saw in the same place a tiny glow of yellow light. The creaking sound came again, and the glow got bigger. A trapdoor had opened in the middle of the floor, and two men came up through it into the main hall. And this is going to be quite hard to see on the computer. You can see it's all in shadows. And here is a little trapdoor, and there are people, two men, climbing out. You can just see in the shadows the outlines of the pictures, because it's so dark in there. Stanley understood everything all at once. These must be the sneak thieves. They had a secret trapdoor into the museum. That was why they'd never been caught. And now, tonight, they were back to steal the most expensive painting in the world. He kept very still in his picture frame, and he listened to the sneaky thieves. "This is it, Max," said the first one. "This is where we art robbers pull a sensational job while everyone else is asleep." "Right, Luther," said the other man. "In all this great city there is no one to suspect us." "Ha ha," thought Stanley Lambchop. "That's what you think." The sneak thieves put down their lantern, and they took the world's most expensive painting off the wall. "What will we do to anyone who tried to capture us, Max?" the first man asked. "We would kill him. What else?" replied his friend. That was enough to frighten Stanley, and he was even more frightened when Luther came over and stared at him. "This sheep girl," Luther said. "I thought sheep girls were supposed to smile, Max. This one looks scared." Now Stanley is going to be scared because he thinks they're going to kill him. Just in time, Stanley managed to get a faraway look in his eyes again, and he tried to do the sort of smile. "You're crazy, Luther," Max said. "She's smiling, and what a pretty little thing she is too." And that made Stanley furious. He waited until the sneak thieves had turned back to the world's most expensive painting, and then he shouted in his loudest, most terrifying voice, "Police, police, Mr. Dart, the sneak thieves are here." The sneak thieves looked at each other. "Max," said the first one very quietly, "I think I heard the sheep girl yell." "I think I did too," said Max in a quivery voice. "Oh boy, yelling pictures, we do need a rest." So here they are. There's Stanley behind them on the wall, and he's just shouted, and they look very scared. "You'll get a rest all right," shouted Mr. Dart, rushing in with the chief of police and lots of guards and policemen behind him. "You'll be arrested, that's what, ha-ha." The sneak thieves were too mixed up by Mr. Dart's joke and too frightened by the policemen to put up a fight. Before they knew it, they had been handcuffed and led away to jail. The next morning in the office, the chief of police, Stanley Lambchop, got a medal. The day after that, his picture was in the papers. So there's the papers there, and it says, "Stanley saves the day." For a while, Stanley Lambchop was a famous name. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, "Over there, look, that must be Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the sneak thieves," and things like that. But after a few weeks, the whispering and staring stopped. People had other things to think about. Stanley didn't mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. And then came a further change, and it wasn't a good one. People began to laugh and make fun of him as they walked past. "Hello, Super Skinny," they would shout, and even ruder things about the way he looked. Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's the other kids mostly that I mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm different, because I'm flat. They're bullying him. It's not very nice." "Shame on them," Mrs. Lambchop said. "It is wrong to dislike people for their shapes, or their religion, or for that matter the colour of their skin. And it is wrong, isn't it? We just have to like people for who they are inside." "I know," Stanley said. "Only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Lambchop, "but we need to try." Later that night, Arthur Lambchop was woken by the sound of crying. In the darkness, he crept across the room and knelt by Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" he said. "Go away," Stanley said. "Don't be mad at me," Arthur said. "You're still mad because I let you get tangled up the day you were my kite, I imagine." "Oh, just leave it," Stanley said. "I'm not mad. Go away." "Please, let's be friends." Arthur couldn't help crying too. "Oh, Stanley, please tell me what's wrong." Stanley waited for a long time before he spoke. "The thing is," he said, "I'm just not happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be a proper shape again, like other people. But I'll have to go on being flat forever, and it makes me sick." "Oh, Stanley," Arthur said. He dried his tears on the corner of Stanley's sheet, and he could think of nothing else to say. "Don't talk about what I just said," Stanley told him. "I don't want the folks to worry. That would only make it worse if Mum and Dad were worried." "You are brave," said Arthur. "You really are." He took hold of Stanley's hand, and the two brothers sat together in the darkness, being friends. They were both a little bit sad, but each one felt a bit better than they had before. And then suddenly, though he was not even trying to think of an idea, Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and turned on the light, and he ran to the big storage box where toys and things were kept, and he began to rummage in the box. There's a huge box here, and he's looking for something in there. Stanley sat up in bed to watch. Arthur flung aside a football and some lead soldiers and aeroplane models and lots of wooden blocks, and then he said, "Aha!" He found what he wanted. It was an old bike pump. So this is what you use to pump up the wheels of a bike. And he looked at his brother. "Okay, Stanley," he said at last, "but take it easy." He put the end of the long pump hose, just here, you can see, into Stanley's mouth, and Stanley closed his lips tightly around the end. "I'll go slowly," Arthur said, "and if it hurts, wheel your hand at me." And he began to push and pump. At first nothing happened except Stanley's cheeks bulged a bit. Arthur watched his hand, but there was no wiggle signal, so he pumped on. And then suddenly Stanley's top half began to swell. "It's working!" shouted Arthur, pumping away. Stanley spread his arms so the air could get around him inside more easily. He got bigger and bigger. The buttons of his pyjama popped off. Pop, pop, pop. A moment more and he was fully round. Head, body, arms and legs. But not his right foot. That foot stayed flat for some reason. Arthur stopped pumping. "It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons," he said. "Maybe a shake would help." Stanley shook his right foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound it swelled out to match the left one. There stood Stanley Lambchop as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. "Thank you, Arthur," Stanley said. "Thank you very much." The brothers were shaking hands when Mr. Lambchop strode into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. "We heard you," said Mr. Lambchop, "up and talking when you should be asleep. Shame on—" "Oh, George," said Mrs. Lambchop, "Stanley's round again." "You're right," said Mr. Lambchop. "Good for you, Stanley." "I'm the one who did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Everyone was very excited and happy, and Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate. When the party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into beds and kissed them, and then they turned out the light. "Good night," they said. "Good night," said Arthur and Stanley. It had been a very long and tiring day, and soon all the Lambchops were asleep. Can you see there? And that is the last bit. So he had some adventures when he was flat. He was a kite. He went in an envelope. He did stopped a burglary, an art theft, and he found his mum's ring. So being flat was very nice, but in the end he was very fed up because he just wanted to be a boy that wasn't flat anymore. But there we go.